Hello, this is Pastor Malin Smith, pastor here at New Hope Baptist Church here in Watertown, New York, and I welcome you today to our ongoing study series through the books of the Bible, where today we're going to be focusing upon the Song of Solomon. Now, before we get into the lesson, I just want to give a shout out to a friend named DeAnthony. DeAnthony, if you are watching this video, just wanted to say hello to you. And so we are very glad that all of you could join us today for this video on the Song of Solomon. And our vision here at New Hope Baptist Church is living life together by bringing new hope in Jesus to all people. And the Song of Solomon urges us to focus on the Lord Jesus Christ by this particular theme that I'm suggesting for it, namely, longing for uninterrupted love. Let me ask you this question. Do you long for a time where you don't experience interruptions? For example, maybe for some of you, you toss and turn throughout the night, and you long for one night where you could have uninterrupted sleep. Or maybe you're having a conversation with someone, and someone interrupts, and you just say to yourself, I wish I could have an uninterrupted conversation. Or maybe you have finally sat down after a long day, and you're getting ready to eat your meal, and then suddenly the phone rings, and you say to yourself, how I wish I could have an uninterrupted time of eating my food. Now, out of all of the various needs in life that we often crave for uninterrupted time, love is the strongest of them. And here in the Song of Solomon, what we see being celebrated a marriage, a wedding, between a king named Solomon and a shepherdess by the name of Shulamite. Now, here in the Song of Solomon, we can roughly place the Song of Solomon early in Solomon's reign. Matter of fact, according to Song of Solomon 6, verse 8, he had by this point 60 queens and 80 concubines. Now, according to 1 Kings 11, verse 3, before it would be all said and done, Solomon would have well over 700 wives, 300 concubines, 1,000 women in all. But out of all of those, Shulamite was unique. And what we see being celebrated here is the marriage between them. Now, in terms of how do we interpret the Song of Solomon? How is it that we can apply this book to our lives? Well, typically, we take a twofold approach, interpreting it literally and then spiritually. Now, in terms of the literal interpretation, in terms of applying it, we note first that the Song of Solomon is urging people who especially have not yet gotten married to purity. We see this several times throughout the book. For example, in Song of Solomon 2, verse 7, here we see Shulamite being recorded as saying these words, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you do not arouse or waken my love until she pleases. And in Song of Solomon 2, verse 7, 3, verse 5, 5, verses 8 and 9, and 8, verse 4, we see this exhortation repeated throughout the book, warning those who have not yet gotten married to not engage in inappropriate physical intimacy. Intimacy that is only reserved for the marital relationship. So really the Song of Solomon, when you read those verses, can be great verses, especially for young people. Then, in terms of a second application, when we're talking about the literal interpretation of the Song of Solomon, is, of course, God's plan for marriage. Now, if we were to outline the Song of Solomon, and if we were to take this theme of uninterrupted love, we could note 4 divisions. In terms of chapters 1 to 3, here we see longing for union with the beloved. We see Shulamite longing for union with what will be her husband Solomon, and vice versa. So, for instance, in chapter 1, verse 7, we read these words, Tell me, O you whom my soul loves, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you make it lie down at noon? Why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flock of your companions? So we see there in chapter 1, verse 7, how Shulamite longs to be with her beloved Solomon. In the opening verses of Song of Solomon, we read these words in chapter 1, verse 1. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. So we see here the celebration of love. We see here the celebration and the anticipation of marriage. So we see there in the first 3 verses the longing for union with the beloved. Then in chapters 4 to 5, we see the loving union of a wife with her husband. Now they are both married. Now the union is consummated. Then, in terms of the third division, which would be chapters 6 and 7, we see the longing for closer proximity between a wife and her husband. Now remember, Solomon was king. He was ruling in Jerusalem. He was a busy man. And so undoubtedly he had to go away and take care of the affairs of the kingdom. Meanwhile, his newly beloved, his new bride Shulamite was longing after him, pining after him. She was longing for closer proximity. The celebrated commentator and preacher Charles Haddon Spurgeon has this to say, quote, "Still is there that same craving for nearness to the beloved. Since we love Christ, we desire to be with him. We cannot bear his absence," end quote. So we see a longing for union with the beloved, a loving union of a wife with her husband, and longing for closer proximity between a wife and the husband. Then the fourth division, which would be the final chapter of the Song of Solomon, namely chapter 8, we see a loving union made stronger by mutual pursuit. Now, the old saying goes like this: absence makes the heart grow fonder. And that's exactly what we see going on in Song of Solomon chapter 8. I love verse 6 of that chapter. "Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised." That's Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. So we see here then this longing for uninterrupted love, and how when we interpret the Song of Solomon literally, it refers to purity and God's plan for marriage. But what about the spiritual interpretation? What about this second level, this spiritual level? Well, many commentators have noted 3 types of relationships that are illustrative of the Song of Solomon. Some have noted that it depicts the relationship between God and Israel. Then when we come to the New Testament, especially when we read back through into the Song of Solomon from the life and the person and the work of the Lord Jesus Christ, we see the Song of Solomon easily illustrating what could be taken as Christ's relationship to his church. After all, for example, in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to 33, there we see the Apostle Paul depicting Jesus Christ and his people in terms of being illustrated by marriage and vice versa. Then, of course, thirdly, the relationship between the believer and the Lord Jesus Christ. So we can see then that when we interpret the Song of Solomon, literally it refers to purity and God's plan for marriage, and then on a spiritual level, it also refers to Christ as our beloved King, as well as the believer's love for Christ. Now, as we close out this video today, if we were to take one verse from the New Testament that I think captures the very essence of the Song of Solomon and this theme of longing for uninterrupted love, it would be 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 8. This is what Peter writes: "And though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory." Spurgeon says, "Sometimes the most eager search does not at once obtain its end. For wise reasons, Christ sometimes hides himself from his seeking people." See, right now, the Christian walks, as it were, by faith. But we long for the day when Christ shall come, and what we hold to by faith will be made sight. Well, I thank you for joining us today as we've taken this short look at the book of the Song of Solomon.